The latest research show that 37% of kids diagnosed with autism lose their diagnosis. And then once we got the diagnosis, I asked, okay, well, now what? What do we do? And that's what got me really focused and interested in saying, I need to understand what autism is. So my daughter is either going to want to do things and going to have these barriers, these blocks, right? Or she's not going to have these barriers, right?
The Arts Council for Monterey County is here to invest in your creative future. If you're a student, your journey is just beginning. Apply now for college arts scholarships or raise your voice as the next Youth Poet Laureate. Honing your craft? The Arts Council for Monterey County offers individual artist grants and free BusinessWorks professional development workshops. From finding inspiration to building a career, the Arts Council for Monterey County is your creative partner. Learn more at arts4mc.org. That's arts4mc.org. What up, what up, what up? Welcome back to Offline Expression. It is a gorgeous day here in Central California. My name is Jeff Henderscheid. I am your host, and we are back. Today, I am joined by an incredible guest, Dr. Theresa Lyons. Dr. Lyons, please say hello to the people.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, perfect, right on cue. Not your first rodeo, I see. You've probably done a podcast or two in your time, I'd imagine.
I have done a few.
Excellent. Good. The experience, it precedes you. We're not, unfortunately, I'm sad to say, Victoria is not with us today. I know that when we first started talking, we had been saying, Jeff and Victoria, hey, we'd love to talk more about this stuff. And I try to get her on here and in here as often as I can. But I find that people get disappointed. They're like, oh, man, where's Victoria at? I want to talk to her, too. And so I always feel a little bit bad about that. But school hours, working hours for us. So I guess we'll let her get her education, right?
I suppose.
Yeah, just today. We'll let it slide. Well, welcome. Where are you from?
I'm from New York.
Okay. Is it freezing there?
It is cold. Yes, definitely, for sure. Cold, snowy. We have winter.
Yeah.
But I like the four seasons. Like I was born in Brooklyn. I was raised in Queens. I've always lived through four seasons, and I really like it. It just keeps things, I don't know, interesting and changing. And
yeah. I imagine there's like a sense of, okay, that part of the year is now over, and now we're moving into this part of the year. So there's like a definite physical understanding of where we're at any given time.
Yeah, definitely. But you have to tune into nature. I mean, that's the cool thing. You have to be present. You have to tune into. I mean, the sunset and sunrises was something I never paid attention to, but the more and more I get into like that rhythm and being focused and present, the more aware I am of nature around me. I
love that, and it's important. Sometimes people don't look up anymore and notice the beauty around them
for a long time.
Totally. We're busy, right? Life takes over. And when you're on the go, sometimes it's an accident, right? You slip and fall and you go, I didn't even know that was a puddle there or something like that. That's how we usually find out the hard way. Here it's, we're lucky in terms of weather. So I try not to complain when it's cold for us because I know people are battling ice and sleet and snow everywhere else. But this is one of the coldest periods we've ever had in this part of California in history. Last week we got, wow. Yeah, it's pretty intense. We have snow on our mountains out here right now, which is very rare, very, very rare, especially here in Monterey County in the central part of, we're very close to the coast. And so it doesn't happen often, but it is beautiful. It was raining pretty hard last week, and now it's sunny again. So, but by sunny, like I said, I try not to rub it in, but 65, and we're like, it's cold
Oh my goodness.
outside. It's so cold outside. I know people are like, oh, get out of here, man. So, anyway, well,
Maybe we'll get
welcome.
to 65 in like 2 months.
Oh my gosh, what's the lowest there right now?
We're
I'm just
fine.
curious.
The lowest, okay, like last week was really bad. The lowest was -2 Fahrenheit.
Oh my goodness. See, I couldn't do it. I went to Seattle once and visited family, and it was like 20, and I thought,
Yeah, yeah.
I won't survive this. I am not made for the cold. I'm such a baby when it comes to that stuff, and it's brutal. Now, granted, I guess I'm just a baby in general, because if it gets up to 115, I'm also very upset.
That's hot.
It is.
That's hot.
And then humidity.
Yeah. I prefer cold because
Really?
with cold, like it's all about gear. Like I
Mm.
can get different gear and layers for cold, but once you get past like I don't know 100, you're just hot. There's not much you can do to like 110, 100. Like it's hot.
Yeah, all you can do
So
is be in
I
water
prefer
or
cold.
sit in front of an AC. That's it.
Yes.
Those are your
You
options.
can't.
Can't take our skin off, right?
No.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you're with us today. So, I've been looking at your website and your research and a lot of the things that you do, and I am just floored by the amount of education and experience you've been able to, obtain in your life already. And you're really young, and you're just such a good advocate, and you've got experience in all these different areas, and you're just driving this point home. And I think it's such an important one. So without further ado, what I'd love to do, Dr. Lyons, is just give you the floor. Please tell our listeners who you are, what you do, all those cool letters by your name, and why it's so important to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the compliments. I certainly appreciate them. Let's see. So I have my PhD in computational chemistry from Yale. I love chemistry, always have since I was a child. And I thought I would have a career in the pharmaceutical industry. That's what I started to do after I got my PhD. So I worked for a large pharmaceutical company, worked in R&D, and that was really fun and interesting. And then I transitioned over to the business side. So I was a medical strategist, and I really enjoyed that to some extent. Um, and then I had a daughter, and then she was diagnosed with autism. And so then, like, any plan I had basically for anything relating to my life was just negated. Like, my life was turned upside down and it was shaking around. And so I just kind of, it took me a while to regain my balance again. But I definitely learned a lot. And what I do now is try and share that with other parents going through the same process that I was going through.
Wow. Yeah. Oftentimes just having a child can be the thing that just says, c'est la vie to the plans, right? They're gone anyway. And so, but I imagine discovering the autism diagnosis and everything that comes with it adds an extra layer of, I got to be present. I got to be there and figure this stuff out. And most parents, when that happens, they don't know what that really entails. So learning everything you can about it at the same time as dealing with it in real time has got to be quite the undertaking.
Yeah. The fortunate thing that I had was this large experience in the healthcare industry. So understanding research, understanding how the pharmaceutical industry operates, understanding things like key opinion leaders and identifying, the cutting edge doctors, who are the doctors that are leading the field. That definitely gave me an advantage to figuring things out. So I had never worked in the autism space before. I didn't know really what autism was and, all the specifics relating to it until my daughter was diagnosed. And really what happened was we got the diagnosis, which took quite a while. And there's a lot to navigate, even just getting the diagnosis. And then once we got the diagnosis, I asked, okay, well, now what? What do we do?
Right.
And as a strategist, right, for the pharmaceutical industry, I was preparing myself to have a list of guidelines. What are the options? These are what are currently being studied in different clinical trials. And there was none of that for autism. It was just, well, it basically gets worse. It doesn't get better with time. There's not really too much to do. There's some behavioral aspects that you can do, but it really was just very unsettling as to, okay, what's the plan? There was no plan. There were no options that were really presented, especially to a chemist. Right. So I think of things on the molecular level, and I want to know, okay, what aspect of her body is not performing optimally? Let me understand that. And there was none of that for autism.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be, I mean, terrifying. I mean, essentially, I mean, for lack of a better term, especially like you said, for a chemist, somebody who already has the ability to break things down that people take for granted all the time, or just go, well, I guess this is the way it is. But to be able to break that stuff down on a, like you said, a molecular level, what is going on, and then to have none of that information or research available has got to be maddening, I imagined.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely very frustrating because I want answers. And it's it, to someone like me to just say, well, there's nothing you can really do is especially about my daughter. Like my daughter telling me there's nothing I can do. No, no, no. Like
No.
that's that's not an acceptable answer to give me at all. But then there is that side of me that is very logical, right? And very scientific. And okay, let me be able to think about this in one aspect. But then there's the mothering side of me where it it is frustrating and it's scary. And you have all these emotions that are flooding through, and you have this child who now needs things very differently, right? So communication is an issue. So okay, how do we even communicate basic things? Are you hungry? Are you tired? Like
Right.
there's so many things that just flow in life that with autism becomes such a challenge and so problematic to figure out that it just adds pressure to the emotions that you're already feeling. It is a really traumatic time in the beginning, for sure, at
Yeah.
least for me.
Yeah, I imagine that you're not alone in that. I have several different friends, family members, and colleagues that have had a similar experience and had to navigate things, and it's always seems so different, So, well, real quick, I just, for the layman out there, right? I know that people who don't live in this world, who don't know it, there's a lot of questions about exactly how it works. So, what is, in your experience and expertise, what is the difference between something like understanding autism spectrum disorder, the terms like neurodiverse that come out a lot, that are, people say a lot more now, that covers a little bit more of a wider, grouping of what other pieces can be in terms of neurology. But when it comes to a spectrum, the understanding, I think, in the general sense is that one side could be really, really, really stunted in terms of growth and disability, perhaps. And then another side could be almost to the point of certain types of seeing the world in these genius levels that people don't actually see them in all the time. What does that spectrum really hold? And have you learned in your time with this, communication skills that work all the way across for different pieces of research that you've done that actually can be effective in all areas of the spectrum? How does that kind of lay out?
So the spectrum is vast and it's varied, and that's the beginning of complexity of autism. Right? So you have this expression called neurodivergent. That's not a medical diagnosis,
Right.
but that is um, definitely a word that is used more commonly, and a lot of times that includes potentially autism, ADHD, ADD. So there's a lot that gets lumped into that neurodivergence. And that is really more of an identity. Again, it's not a medical diagnosis. For
Right.
autism is a medical diagnosis. You can't just diagnose yourself, right? So the process of getting a diagnosis is frustrating because the diagnosis is based on observation, right? That's why people try to diagnose themselves because they just, self-reflect and say, okay, I have autism. But to receive that medical diagnosis, typically for a younger child, what happens is you have physical therapy evaluation, occupational therapy evaluation, speech therapy evaluation, maybe a psych eval, something that speaks to the way this child learns, if they can even capture that. And then when you see the different deficits of communication, right? So, can this child speak? Some kids with autism cannot speak at all. Some kids can speak, but they can't really hold a conversation. There's no ebb and flow back and forth. They can maybe say what they want, but if you ask them, "How was your day?" there not might not be any response. So speech can look very differently on the autism spectrum itself. And so there are different requirements that there needs to be observed. And if that is the case, then you get the diagnosis of autism. And now this is the part that really frustrated me because it was like, okay, we have the diagnosis, but what does that actually mean in the sense of the body? So, like, why are these deficits happening? And so that is not taken into account in an autism diagnosis. There isn't a medical test. So there's not a urine test, a blood test, even an MRI. There's nothing that can be done that will give definitive answers like, yes, you're over this threshold and that means autism. It's it's all based on observation. So that
Right.
that is the frustrating part. And you can see just even in speech alone, like what I talked about, it can be very varied. So
Right.
you're 100% correct in the sense that the spectrum itself, right? There are different levels. There's 3 levels, and so on one end of the spectrum, you have someone who can dress themselves, walk across the street, maybe as they get older, drive a car. They can go to school without having, like, a TA or a shadow or something like that, but it might be very difficult for them to hold a conversation, an actual conversation. Maybe they can speak, but they can't have that back and forth conversation. They're very fixated on certain things.
Mm.
They might be stimming, so that might isolate them socially. Um, and then on the opposite side of the spectrum, the more profound side, you might have someone who can't speak, can't dress themselves, can't maybe cut food, can't write, and might really never be able to live independently. Now,
Mhm.
one thing that is similar on the spectrum, are things like autism meltdowns, right? So this is when the body and the nervous system just gets so overwhelmed that it just needs to go offline, right? So you can have a meltdown in the sense that it's very physical, so there might be biting and kicking and, potentially even, like, punching the wall, having aggression like that.
Mhm.
It could turn into an autism shutdown where the person just goes quiet and withdraws. A lot of parents see that as well. So there are similarities in different things that can happen to someone on the autism spectrum regardless of where they are, but it gets difficult because communication is really the heart of a lot of these issues,
Mhm.
and it's a challenge all throughout the spectrum.
Wow, that I can see that being a challenge. The fact that it's just mostly based on observation just seems so um wild in so many ways, because we know it's a thing
And
and it's a spectrum, right? It's so obvious that
yeah,
it's a thing. So what is happening? I know from the psychological aspect, sometimes there are is there's there's genetic testing and stuff that could be done early on for other things, and so senses there's got to be some sort of scientific, like you said, some sort of scientific tell in a lot of ways, but the fact that there really isn't, and it's observation, because then you know where you kind of are with each of these areas, is that's just so much extra heartache and stress, like right out of the gate, and so I
yeah.
my man, that's hard. Well, you mentioned
It
something that I
it's hard
yeah.
because it doesn't point you in a direction of what can I do?
Right.
Right? So you get this diagnosis and the doctor's not telling you anything like earth-shattering typically,
Mhm.
right? Like, okay, so because you have all these different reports, they were done, weeks before, so you kind of know, okay, we're marching towards this diagnosis, and then you get the diagnosis, but it's so empty in the sense of, okay, but what do I do? What is it that I need to do as a parent? And it's just not there at all.
Oh my gosh. And thank goodness there's people like you. I have a friend who lives in New Mexico, and growing up, her brother had autism, and her whole life, she's basically dedicated to trying to learn more about it and created a group and called Autism Specialists. And they work with lots of different clients and families and stuff. And she kind of says the same thing. It's everything is so case by case basis in a vacuum,
Yeah.
while there's also an understanding that this is the diagnosis that is covers all of it, and it's so interesting that seems like such a counter. I don't know. Almost feels counterproductive in a lot of ways, because it's the diagnosis is there, but now it could be any of these billion different pieces that have to go into creating the plan that works just for that child or that person. Um, so you said something that I really wanted to point out, and I was trying to keep my own opinions to myself about it, but I am with you in terms of, you know, I tell my students often that there are words that mean something a lot bigger that have now lost meaning because they get thrown around in common vernacular all the time. And so there's certain words I tell them, try not to say that if you don't really fully understand it. And one of them is, people are like, oh my God, they're a psycho. Like, do you know what a psychopathic person is like? Do you understand the weight that word should carry? But neurodivergent, okay? It covers so many things. And I think it's so important to understand that while, yes, there's a lot of different groups that could be neurodivergent, OCD, ADHD, ADD, autism, maybe, like all these different pieces. When people throw that around as oh, we need to help all the neurodivergent people, I don't think that there's an understanding that, like, that's a lot of people. Like, that is so many people. That is like all the people you probably know have some sort of thing like that. It makes them fall in under the category of neurodivergent. And now it's kind of flipped this scale in the sense to where, like, neurotypical is somehow the outcast group because, oh, you don't understand because you're neurotypical. And so there's been this interesting thing that I've noticed over the last couple of years at the college level, especially, where it's not getting its due. It's not getting its credit. So I do think it is important to be like, if you're self-diagnosing for anything, like, people do that a lot, like, oh, I can't even look at
Yeah.
that room because of my OCD. And it's like, oh, you have obsessive compulsive disorder? Well, I mean, I think I do. I just can't stand that stuff being out of place. I'm like, oh, that is not exactly how that works. So I do feel it is always important to be like, look, when we're talking about an actual diagnosis, the process by which people have to test and test and test, and the amount of appointments and the amount of research and the amount of data and the amount of stuff that has to go into getting an official, real diagnosis of a mental disorder or a psychological disorder or whatever is so much more than just labeling. Like you said, it's an identity label kind of a thing. And so I really appreciate that you
Yeah.
kind of pointed that out, because I feel that way too. It actually kind of grinds my gears sometimes.
Well, that's an area of contention in the autism world because you'll have some people who will say autism is my identity. That is who I am. That is, I am autistic, right? When someone says that. And then you will have other people who say, no, autism is not who I am. It's a diagnosis. And a lot of times people who say that have more of the um, medical effects in the sense like the meltdowns are more intense, right? So they might be aggressive. They might have a lot of GI issues. They might have a lot of different medical issues that get associated with the autism diagnosis, and then they say, "No, I'm not a diagnosis." Right? So then you have these 2, perspectives that really go at it. If you go on social media, right,
Yeah.
you'll see the arguments as to, "No, autism is not an identity, it's a diagnosis." And then if someone is trying to help someone, and many times it's perceived as being less artistic, then that is somehow being, like, challenging to who that person is, and so it can get really, contentious quickly. And the other thing, like, so research-wise, right, the latest research show that 37% of kids diagnosed with autism lose their diagnosis, in the sense that they don't have any of those blocks for,
No.
social or speaking or anything like that. So there is a large body, and this research was done at Boston Children's Hospital. And research like this is done, once a decade or so, you'll see a publication. When my daughter was diagnosed, that number was 10%. So 10% of kids diagnosed with autism lost their diagnosis. And that's what got me really focused and interested in saying, I need to understand what autism is, because that is 2 different just areas of life. So my daughter is either going to want to do things and going to have these barriers, these blocks, right? Or she's not going to have these barriers, right? And as a parent, it's like, I need to know. I
Yeah.
need to know how she does not have barriers.
How
Any
do I
parent wants
support
to know
her?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the contention, and that is when someone takes a diagnosis and internalizes it and say, like, so, right, you mentioned in the beginning how, many people with autism are high intelligence, right? So, I understand that if someone wraps their identity, like, "I am smart because I am autistic," right? Like, you can see where
Mm,
that would be problematic if somebody said, "Well, you don't have to be autistic," right? Because if you take that argument, then it's like, if I take away the autism, I'm going to take away their intelligence, or whatever else they feel that autism has brought to them.
right.
So that's the important part, and I don't have an answer for that, right? Like, this is just how does someone want to think about who they are as a person, and
Hmm.
what defines them, and labels. And as we put more labels on it, right, like, neurotypical, like you said, is now like a bad thing. Right?
Right.
It's like, oh, you're neurotypical, you don't understand. And so a lot of these labels just separate us even more, which I
100%.
don't think is beneficial.
I agree with you. And you know what? Back to your point, like I can see how the intelligence and the identity stuff, and then the flip side is if a lot of your particular autism diagnosis has serious behavioral things that cause a lot of stress and hardship in the family that lead to sadness or anger or outbursts, and there's a negative connotation to that. Of course, those are the times when it might not be beneficial to be like, no, I am not my diagnosis. That is a separate thing. I'm a victim to that diagnosis, and that's a symptom of that. And so you could see how there could be those 2 different sides of separating oneself from it or claiming it as an identity. And that is one of the biggest pieces that I have seen in my um, studies, work, I guess, research, is that there's a common misconception, and it's good to know, it's validating to know that is everywhere. That is in the whole field. Like, if there's not a lot of information on what to do and how to do it, because we don't know, and most of it's based on observation, then of course the people that are trying to figure it out and they don't have the resources or the support or the education and the experience or whatever it might be to really get what they need, they're going by what is out there online and popular, and the support, and so the words can get twisted around, and
Yeah.
it's tough. So, well, okay, all of that having been said, so you find out, your life changes, you're like, okay, I need to know what I'm going to do about this. So you have done a lot based on your website and books and all this other stuff. So What where did you go from there when you started doing your research and doing all your writing and stuff? How did that all start to progress for you and lead you to where you are now?
So really that one piece of research that I mentioned, that 10% of kids with autism lose their diagnosis, that was the most recent publication about that when my daughter was diagnosed. And so when I read that, it really made me stop and say, okay, how did they do that? 10%. I mean, I look back and, a decade before it was about like 5%. And, a decade before that or so, it was about, 1% or so. So I saw there's this steady increase of kids who did not retain their autism diagnosis, and I wanted to know how. So it was, calling the researcher, talking to them, and say, like wanting to really understand from their perspective what were they seeing, right? Because this is all about seeing. There was
Right.
no information about what those parents did, right? So it's like first I wanted to understand, like, all right, is this there's something called masking. So right, so if the autism diagnosis is based on observation, did the doctor just observe the kid on a good day, right? Like
Right.
what were the metrics, and how realistic is this? And the researchers were all credible, and they explained different things, and they said how the term was an optimal outcome for those kids who lost their diagnosis. And so then I started talking to different parents. I ended up speaking to, I think it was over 40 different parents individually, talking to them
Okay.
about how their child was, what were the symptoms, right? Because the symptoms are so different. That's what makes autism so complex. And then, what did they do and what did they learn and how is their kid now? So it was really me understanding the chemistry, but at a much higher viewpoint, and really making sure that this was something that was real. And then it was like, all right, let's start understanding the gut. Let's start understanding some basic health stuff, vitamin D, calcium, hydration. There's so much that is basic to health that when someone gets an autism diagnosis, it's just like, well, that's just autism. Oh, they have constipation. They only poop like once every 10 days. That's just autism. Oh, they have diarrhea and they're pooping 5 times, 6 times a day. Yep, that's autism. Oh, they can't potty train. Yep. Right. So there were so many of these excuses for, oh, that's just autism. And it's not true. So it starts to become, let me really understand the body and what the challenge is. So for me, it was first looking at my daughter, like, okay, let me understand her symptoms and what's related, and what actually makes an impact. And then it became teaching this, so taking the scientific literature, taking research articles. That's how I started my YouTube channel over a decade ago, was to take one research publication and teach it to parents so that
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have to wait 30 years for this stuff to become common knowledge, and they might not have the time or the interest to go into PubMed and read scientific journal articles. But I felt like there was certain information that was really important for parents to know so they could make decisions. So it's not me saying this is what you need to do for your child, because again,
Mm-hmm.
autism is so complex because it's not the same. So I can't say this is what you need to do for your child, A, B, C, D, and that works for everybody. It's not true. You
Right.
really have to understand the symptoms. You have to understand what is most meaningful to this family, right? Because as you mentioned, uh, autism can impact families in the sense that maybe a parent can't work anymore, or there's additional stress. So what is it, the top 3 things that would actually improve family life? That is what you want to focus on, and that varies from person to person.
Right. Oh man, that I think it's so fascinating that you were able to like find that percentage and then be able to dive in, be like, okay, so why is that changing? That makes that's a really good point. Like statistics will evolve with our ability to understand them and our ability to test. So was it wrong early? Is it wrong now? What is the difference between them? How does one lose a diagnosis in the first place, right? Like, what does that mean? Is that just because there's higher functioning or we know more about all these other pieces and therefore they are not necessarily the struggle? So it's really important to know that. And I love that you mentioned, basic health stuff, because the big question is, can this person who has gotten this diagnosis, can their body do it? And if it can, is it just about that explanation and that process and those habits, or is it that the body physically is incapable of doing that? And that's a big difference. If one person's constipated for 10 days, like you mentioned, what are they eating? How are they being fed? What is their understanding of nutrients? Like, what concept of communication do they have when it comes to food prep and all that kind of stuff? Like, there's so many pieces that are out there that don't tell you whether or not that person's body is capable of the things that it needs to do versus being taught how to do it. And so that's really great. And so you said that you saw this climb 1%, 5%, 10%. Now it's 37%, you said?
Now it's 37.
So
Yeah.
what exactly, just to be very clear, when you lose your diagnosis or it doesn't stay with them, what does that mean for them? Like, it comes out of a medical jacket. They no longer get the support that they need. Is there insurance stuff that's involved with whether or not they now are going to be able to get other things? Or has there just been some sort of a training and something that's clicked? How do you lose a diagnosis in that way?
So usually the way the process goes is if someone is diagnosed young in life, so under the age of 6 or so, then they get reevaluated at the age of eight, and then also at the age of 18. So there are different standardized checkpoints, right, for doctors to really understand how this child is doing. And so the first research that was done where 10%, it was kids were diagnosed very young, around 2 years or so, and then the follow-up was done about 2 years later. And so that was a very tight timeline, and that number was about 10%. Whereas with Boston Children's Hospital just a few years ago, it's a large center, and so what they did was they were analyzing the medical records, and their timeline was much longer. It was more like 5 years, and so that number is 37. And what does it mean for like insurance and stuff? You don't get like a I don't know, a piece of paper that says no longer autism. So it kind of stays on that person's record, but a lot of times as you start going to different doctors, right, they always ask you, okay, what are your diagnoses? And a lot of times parents, once you have a doctor who says, well, there's no longer autism, you just don't perpetuate that. For like IEPs and stuff, some parents, they don't really ever like notify the school. Sometimes kids just gradually don't need as much support, and then they keep the IEP just in case they need it, right? So there's a lot of things like that that parents do. So each parent handles it differently as to how they want to notify different people. But it mainly has to do with support and supports at school and paying for things for insurance. But I will say insurance does not pay for much of an autism diagnosis. So you sometimes will get PT paid for, physical therapy. Sometimes you'll get occupational therapy. But many times the really good therapists, and I hesitate saying that, but many times there are many therapists who don't take insurance. So it's like, okay, I have the diagnosis, but it's not really helping me out in any way greatly in the healthcare space. In school, yes. So in school, once you have an autism diagnosis, that's one of the qualifying diagnoses for an IEP. So that starts a whole level of support that is mandated by that diagnosis.
Right. Okay. Wow. Okay. So here's the $1 million question then I got for you.
Okay.
In your experience, and your research, how has the digital world affected these diagnoses? And I'll add just the little piece on this. I know several different people who have autistic children, and I have seen several different people I know or, come across where an iPad and headphones become very, very, man, I don't know how to say this.
Necessary.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go with necessary. And I don't know if that's the word. I don't understand it myself. And so my question, I guess, is it necessary? Is it just helpful? Is it being overused? Is it something that is just to kind of create safety and helpfulness for that child? Is it just to help give the parents more of like I need to take care of some other things and this is something that they like, so I'm going to use it? Is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? I know there's a lot of questions around that with children who are not diagnosed with autism, but I'm curious, is that good, bad? What do you think?
So that answer really depends on so much of what's going on with the child. So sometimes the headphones are really to prevent the noise, and the noise is what can cause stimulation, too much stimulation, and then you have an autistic meltdown. So if you see someone wearing headphones, and a lot of times it's headphones, maybe not, and they're not playing a game or doing something. It's really just the noise canceling headphones. So you see kids walking around like malls and things like that with the headphones on. It's typically just because they're sensitive to sound. Um, and so that's one aspect. The other aspect is, okay, when it's paired with the iPad or music or something like that. Now, I mean, oh, we could talk about this for oh, quite a bit, but sometimes in therapy, so particularly ABA, which is applied behavioral analysis, and that's really the only therapy that insurance pays for. And so what that is you take large skills and you break it down into small little steps, and then you have repetition so that the small step can be mastered, and then you roll it out into the big stuff. So even like pointing at letters, pointing at colors in ABA, what they do is that child might have to point to red 10 times in a row, and they have to get it right 8 times out of 10. Otherwise, they get, noted that, oh, they don't really know what the color red is. So obviously some kids are like, this is ridiculous. I know what red is, and you keep asking me to do the same thing over and over again, and it's frustrating. So sometimes just out of frustration, they don't point to the right color. Sometimes with autism, there's a motor planning issue. So pointing to red, they might know, listen, I know what red is. I want my finger to go right there to red, and they go there and their finger just goes somewhere else, right? Their body is not listening to what their mind is saying. So in all of these instances in ABA and different therapies, a lot of times the iPad is used as a reward. Now it's an extrinsic reward. Sometimes, M&Ms or a candy or cookies or something like that is also used as an extrinsic reward. So many times this habit of I want my iPad is something that they've had to work towards, right? And then it just becomes a habit of, all right, I did what I needed to do, give me the tablet, right? So it becomes difficult when you're trying to teach a child to enjoy life and find enjoyment from something that really brings them joy. So sometimes you'll see a child with the tablet a lot. It's just because they have learned the habit of, okay, I did my work and now I get my tablet, right? So that is their joy. Many adults are like that too, right? So sometimes we just need to zone out. So there's also like, all right, I just want to zone out for a little bit, and use the tablet. So that certainly is understandable as well.
I worry that with dopamine addictive loops and things that are oftentimes a problem when it comes to, for lack of a better term, somebody who isn't diagnosed with autism, we know it's a problem for young developing brains and like what's happening. Is there any concern in the world of autism that those are compounding symptoms or making them worse or harder to function, or are they mostly beneficial because of the way they kind of help mitigate some other symptoms that people? Is it just too soon to tell? Um, is it the same type of addiction that happens with those neurotransmitters when somebody is diagnosed with autism and therefore a problem?
There's a few ways to answer that question. Based on research in 2025, there was a meta-analysis that looked at 46 different clinical trials. It was almost 50,000 participants that they were analyzing, and it showed that people with autism had higher levels of problematic internet usage, right? So that's very broad. It doesn't really answer the dopamine question. Um, but many times the tablet is used for parents just to get a break.
Right.
And a lot of times it is difficult for a child with autism to, go to the zoo or go to the movies or do certain things. And again, they've been trained in many sense that the iPad is a reward by their therapists. So you have all of this going on. And what I found is as kids start to get healthier, then learning becomes easier and it's easier to get off the tablet. So I've had kids who were really dependent upon it, and it turns out when they were really dependent upon it, they had headaches and stomach aches and joint pain and um, you know, pain when urinating and all of this. And then as these health issues were resolved, some of these kids, they end up just giving their parents a tablet and being like, "I wanna go out and play. I wanna go to the park," right? So it really depends on the child at the time. So I don't wanna put too much pressure on parents who give their child a tablet as long as it's not the only thing for their child,
Right.
and if it's more of a short term,
Yeah.
that's better, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I guess balance in the world of digital safety is going to always matter. And so, regardless of diagnosis and what parents are dealing with, it sounds like that tends to be the same, especially when, like you said, if you're seeing a list of negative symptoms coming from um, the client, and then you can hone in on the fact that, oh, this might be caused because of this. Well, then of course, like anytime we have something like that, then we want to mitigate it and such. So, well, thank you. I always wonder about that because I want to be I don't want to be ignorant on things I don't know about and just say it's a sweeping thing. Anybody who's using a tablet for 6 hours a day is making a terrible choice or whatever. But, when you have certain things that you're dealing with and other challenges to contend with, who are we to judge, right? So it's like you never really know what people are dealing with. And so I think that's a really important message.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially because
Yeah.
like you said earlier, somebody in the mall might have headphones on, and there are people that will do a thin slice judgment of that and just think, okay, I got to attribute that behavior to the fact that they're just totally disconnected to the world and they don't care and they're just so addicted to their and it's like
Right.
you don't actually know that. That could be really helpful for
No.
them and the symptoms that they're dealing with. So we have to be careful. And this is a good reminder for me too. I'm on my soapbox all the time about put down the Snapchat and all this stuff. And, I feel like I have enough research to say that most of the time I could say, look up at the world, at the beauty around you, but you still just don't know. You're going to commit that fundamental attribution error and just assume that it's a personality, dispositional thing and not think about the situation in context. And you can't just do that all the time. And people need to be aware of that. So,
Yeah. And especially for autism parents, I would just put this out there that sometimes there's a choice between, okay, I give my child a tablet and then I myself don't have a meltdown, right? So like sometimes
Right.
you're picking between sanity and you're at the end of your rope and you might yell at your child. You might do, stuff that you don't want to do
Right.
because you're stressed and you're just not in that space. So
Right.
for parents who are in that space, just give the tablet, go get a little breather. Like
Yep.
it's okay if the child has a tablet, as long as that's not the end goal, right?
Right.
Like that's not how life can be. But sometimes in those stressful moments, you've got to have some kind of option. And as the child gets healthier, right? you have more options for that child to do.
Right.
So, like I said, there are kids who then end up giving back the tablets to the
Right.
parents because they're like, "I wanna go play a game. I wanna play with my toys. I wanna go ride a bike. Like, I wanna go do stuff," right?
Yeah.
So for the short term, it's totally understandable.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's just for the breather, right? Sometimes parents are like, it's tax season. I gotta go call my accountant. I've got to go get on this Zoom call. I've gotta work. I've got things I have to do also. So sometimes it's
Right.
a whole perfect storm of being a parent in general, running a
Yeah.
household and getting the groceries and paying the bills and all that stuff.
Right.
Sometimes
Yeah.
there isn't even a breather when you're trying to get the breathers. So, totally understand and respect that for sure. Well, Dr. Lyons, this has been amazing. I am curious. Can you please tell our listeners where we can get more information about this stuff? What your website is, and the works that you have that you've written that we can get access to?
Sure. So you can find me at navigatingautism.com, and that is AWETISM. We have a platform that supports parents in navigating all of this scientific information so they can make really good decisions based upon really good information. We have health coaches that help them navigate this whole process, right? This is a long journey, so you need really supportive people around you. So if they're interested in more support, it's also flexible spending approved. So parents can certainly check us out there. And then I do have a YouTube channel. That's my main social media platform. So you can check me out at Navigating Autism. And yeah, I look forward to interacting with anyone who leaves comments.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And sorry about our little technical flub, but we got it back on here to make sure we can wrap it up. But thank you for your time. I appreciate you, and I hope that you stay warm as you fight through the winter months.
Yep. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.